Okay, thank you. I'd like to introduce Zuzi Abdala today. She has been an NSF graduate research intern in the NOAA Fisheries Office of Science and Technology, and I think she's going to have a very interesting presentation for you today. I'm going to let her take it away.
Sounds good.
Oh, actually,
Thank you. Okay, so welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I'm going to be talking about a project that I did for my internship. So as Laura mentioned, I'm an NSF graduate research fellow and intern, and I completed my internship project, carried that out in NOAA Fisheries Office of Science and Technology. The project title is Climate Communication Preferences, Results from Statistical Analyses on a Fisheries Stakeholder Survey. So I'm going to dive into kind of what this survey was about. So the background is, I'm going to mention MAFAC throughout this survey. It stands for the Marine Fisheries Advisory Committee. And this group was tasked with identifying the type of climate science information, specifically the types, formats, usage, etc. This information in regards to the NOAA fishery stakeholders. So what these stakeholders were looking for from NOAA fisheries. So MAFAC designed and distributed a survey back in 2016, and it gathered information on these climate communication preferences. MAFAC had already analyzed this survey, the survey results in 2017. My project specifically was focused on doing a reanalysis, but looking at it through the lens of the Affiliation Group. So here I'll be discussing the results of that reanalysis and making climate communication recommendations. So the outline for this presentation that I'll be giving, first I'll talk about the details of the survey and the analysis. I'll then go into the respondent pool and kind of break down the stakeholder group and age of these groups. Then I will talk about what the results of the analysis were, and again, through the lens of the affiliation group classification. And finally, I will be talking about the key findings and recommendations from this analysis. So, some quick details about the survey. This survey was classified as a customer service survey under the Paper Reduction Act. It was created using SurveyMonkey, and it was distributed a number of ways. It was available on the NOAA Fisheries website, on the MAFAC website. It was sent to the subscribers of Fish News, and it was also distributed through partners and stakeholder groups. The survey was available for 37 days in late 2016. There were 688 respondents who completed the full survey, and they answered a total of 61 questions. And this was composed of 14 main questions and a lot of subparts for some of the questions, for a total of 61. So many of the questions were Likert-based, Likert scale based, and these are those survey questions that I'm sure you've seen, that you mark 1 for really low importance, 2 for moderate importance, stuff like that. So here are the main survey questions. First, we asked, what was your affiliation, the region of interest, the level of concern regarding the environmental change impacts, and a number of questions regarding the climate science information that the stakeholders wanted. So the type of information, the source, the format that they prefer, and how they use the data, or the information, and who are the trusted experts. So I'm going to go over the 3 different main affiliation groups. The first one I will refer to as the Fisheries Group, not to be confused with NOAA Fisheries Group. This is just people who are in fisheries-related affiliations. So these were respondents who exclusively selected among the following. There were 229 respondents, and they selected among commercial fishermen or crew, a for-hire charter captain or crew, tribe, recreational angler, aquaculture, and other fishing-related business or industry. The second group is known as the non-fishery group. These are, there were 265 respondents, and they're exclusively non-fisheries related affiliations. Among these are the university faculty and staff, the students, other research institutions, state, local, federal government, news media, student or teacher, nonprofit organization, and other. And our last group is known as both. We have, these are people, there were 194 respondents. These are the people who selected one in each of the categories. So this means that they selected, for example, I am a state government employee and I'm also a recreational angler. So let me take you through some of the details of the analysis that I did. In Excel, I first wanted to break up the data so it was easier to handle. So I split up our classifications that the respondents selected for the affiliations into just these 3 big groups that I had just told you about: the fisheries, the non-fisheries, and both. Those are the affiliation groups. Then I decided to switch the Likert scales from the original survey. Original survey had 1 as a very high importance as an example, and I switched it to so that it was 5, so it was a little more intuitive. And then I ran some statistical tests. I did these in SPSS. I first wanted to get just a really rough idea of the data I was dealing with, so I did some descriptive statistics. I tested for normality within each affiliation group. I ran a set of ANOVA tests to find the differences among the affiliation groups. And then I ran some post hoc tests to find more detailed differences. So now I'm going to show you kind of the composition of each of the affiliation groups. In the fisheries group, this group is mostly composed of these 5 different affiliations. We have recreational angler, aquaculture, commercial fishermen, for-hire charter, and other fishing-related business. For the non-fisheries group, we have these kind of like top 4. We have state, local government, federal government, nonprofit, and university faculty, and a nice array of the other groups. And for the both fisheries and non-fisheries group, we have kind of the 3 big groups for the recreational angler, aquaculture, and the nonprofit. And then there's a nice mix of the rest of the groups. And for those who want the actual data set, I can more than happy to send this to you, but this is just showing you how those groups kind of broke down into number-wise. So now I'm going to talk about very quickly the age breakdown of each affiliation group, because it's important to note there may be some kind of age group differences versus fisheries group affiliation differences, but not too different, right? So we have kind of the bigger groups in all of these categories is the 41 to 64 age group. For the fisheries group, the second biggest group is the 65 or over, and that is comprises almost a third of the group. And then for the non-fisheries group, almost a third is the 26 to 40 age categorization. And then, so it's kind of, for the ages on the, the 65 or over and the 26 to 40, those percentages are kind of flipped for these groups, right? And then both is kind of a nice mix of all of the groups. So statistically, the age composition is significantly different between just the fisheries and the non-fisheries group. And the key takeaway was that the fisheries group was significantly older than the non-fisheries. So we're going to be getting into the meat of the survey. We have the first question, which asks the respondents, how concerned are you about the effects of environmental change on fisheries, aquaculture, and coastal communities? So here is the average score of each of the groups. Now, when you average the responses from 200 over 200 people, they're kind of going to fall within this pretty small range of numbers, but having an average of just above 3.2 to 3.7, that's a huge difference, statistically speaking. And what these numbers mean is that 1 was like the lowest level of environmental concern, and then 5 was the highest. So the level of concern is significantly different between all the group pairs. So fisheries group compared to both, that was significantly different. So all of the pairs. And the key takeaway here is that fisheries group was overall less concerned about climate change. So the rest of the questions I'm showing to you as a heat map, and this is because there's so many of these subparts that it would be kind of confusing to show you in a bar graph or any other graph, right? So I'm going to give you a quick primer, and please raise your hand if you need me to slow down or revisit something. So heat maps deliver a lot of information at once, right? I'm going to just touch on how these are going to be displayed to you. First, on the top edge, we're going to have the different affiliation groups that I've been showing you. So the fisheries group, the non-fisheries group, and both. And then on the left-hand side, we're going to have all of the question subparts. And then each of the boxes will represent the average scores, and it will be represented by a color. And green means an overall high usefulness or importance. And then black is an overall mediocre usefulness or importance. And then a red is an overall low usefulness or importance. And remember, these are all relative to the other data points within the data set. So just keep that in mind. And anything that falls in between, so like we have like a dark green would be an overall kind of high, but not the highest importance. And then like a dark red would be somewhere in between mediocre and a low importance. So question 2 was, what is the type of information related to the effects of environmental change on fisheries, aquaculture, and coastal communities would be most useful to you? So the heat map I just showed you is here. The fisheries group and the non-fisheries group and both are showed in these vertical columns, and then all of the horizontal rows are the sub-questions. So if we take a quick look at just overall, we see that the fisheries group versus the non-fisheries group, we have way more red and black in the fisheries group versus the non-fisheries group. And so we may, and again, this is all relative, but we were seeing that there was a mediocre to low usefulness for the fisheries group overall, comparatively to the non-fisheries group. So I did want to quickly point out visually the things that kind of jump out the most when we have one group that's like red, right, a low usefulness, and then a a group that has like a green higher usefulness score. So these were the groups that were visually the most different. We have sea level rise, low importance for fisheries group, higher importance for non-fisheries group, and then effects on fishing communities and response tools for environmental change. So next, I'm showing you these groups were significantly different when you look at the affiliation group. So for example, for sea level rise, there was a significant difference between how the fisheries group responded, how the non-fisheries group responded, and also how both responded. So when we kind of look at this in its totality, it's a lot of information, but I just wanted to have a key takeaway for each of these. The most useful information for all of the groups, the consensus is that they want information on changing ocean temperatures, changes in fish distribution, and changes in habitat distribution. So for question 3, it asked about what are the information sources that are most important to you regarding the effects of environmental change. So these are the information sources on the left-hand side. And I did box in the ones that are like visually, one's red, one's green. I think those are pretty interesting to look at, but you can look at these heat maps for a long time and notice all these little tidbits that are very interesting. So I boxed in the significantly different category or the information sources, meaning these were the information sources significantly different from the affiliation groups. And the key takeaway here is that the most important information sources for all the groups was NOAA websites, which is great, reports or journals, and federal regulations. So question 5 asks the respondents, who are the experts you trust the most as credible sources of information about the effects of environmental change? So we have the trusted experts on the left-hand side. And again, I just wanted to throw up boxes that show a red versus green dynamic going on in the affiliation groups. So we have industry leaders and other fishermen showing green for fisheries group versus a red for non-fisheries group. And then the rest of these are kind of a lower trust level for the fisheries group compared to the non-fisheries group. And so I did box in. It was easier to box in the only not significant difference between the groups because everything else was a significant difference between the groups, which is very telling, right, about the trusted experts between fisheries and non-fisheries groups. They're in agreement, federal and state elected officials are a no-go. So the key takeaway here is the most trusted expert for all the groups, consensus, university scientists. So question 7 asks the respondents to rate the usefulness of the following information formats. So again, this was one where there was a lot of significant difference between the groups. It doesn't visually look like it, but it's all, again, it's all relative. Statistics is a funny thing, right? So we have the not significantly different between photographs for the affiliation groups and then firsthand experiences. So this means they're in agreement about those things. So the key takeaway here is that the most useful information formats for all the groups was charts or graphs and firsthand experiences. So something that I was interested in doing kind of after doing all these analyses was I wanted to know, okay, so we have all this cool, survey data. What is kind of in relation to the other factors, what do they see as higher in value comparatively to the other factors? So what I did was I averaged the scores of all the sub parts of the questions, right, to determine which factors were most important, because they're all really on the same scale, from like lowest importance to highest importance. They were on the same level there. So what we have is that these groups that I boxed in were significantly different between the groups. But overall, what we have is that the environmental change information score was higher across the board for these groups. So environmental change information is the most important information to these groups collectively. And what doesn't matter as much is important sources, right? So they don't really care where they get their information from, but the type of information is the most important. So overall recommendations. This reanalysis project has kind of uncovered these smaller details on how the stakeholder groups prefer to be informed about these climate science findings. And to improve the reach of our climate science efforts, I have 4 recommendations. First, I would like, the data speaks for itself, but focus on providing information about changes in 1, fish distribution, 2, habitat distribution, and 3, ocean temperatures. Focusing our efforts here will definitely cut down on, I don't want to say wasted efforts, but we'll definitely cut down on the time that we're spending trying to tell the fisheries group about sea level rise. They don't want to hear it. So number 2, continue to share information from NOAA websites. Turns out everyone likes hearing, seeing information from NOAA websites, and I think that that's a really cool piece of information. Third, it would be most advantageous to coordinate with university scientists when dealing with or trying to get information out to the fisheries community. It can be a little bit challenging to kind of reach across the aisle, but having that liaison being the university scientists would be really helpful in amplifying the climate science communication. And lastly, I think it would be helpful to create or strengthen programs that offer opportunities for stakeholders to engage in climate science learning through field experiences or firsthand experiences. That's a really highly valued thing across the groups. So kind of them going out and seeing it for themselves is something that's, I think, going to reach them a little bit better than other avenues. So I would like to have a huge acknowledgement to Laura Ormland, who is my primary mentor for this project. My project team, Rita Curtis, Roger Griffiths, and Jay Peterson, thank you so much. And a special thanks to Heidi Levitt and Brian Kitts-Jensen for helping with the analysis. And with that, I will take any questions.
Okay, I have one question online that I'm going to ask first.
Okay.
Can you speak to the location of the respondents? The Mid-Atlantic is a very large region. Do you know where they were from state-wise?
Yeah, so we have information on the IP addresses of where the respondents took the surveys. That data has not been mined, I guess, quite yet. We do have their region of interest, but someone who lives in like the Northeast, for example, could have a region of interest being the Southeast. So there's that factor, but we do have regional data that is available to play with for someone else, but yes.
Do you have any questions in the room? Okay.
My question would be, are you aware of, I'm sure there's similar-ish type of surveys that have been presented to the public in other ways. Was your results pretty consistent? Was there anything that was a little surprising compared to some other type of climate public perception surveys that have been done?
I actually am not sure on that one. I didn't really do any kind of background research on similar surveys. To my knowledge, there's not many. But to me, like all of the pieces of information were really surprising, actually. The longer you look at the heat maps, the more surprising things you find. So those will be available in a bit.
So a question on the information types. So it showed one of them was shifting distribution. So it said the fisheries group wasn't really excited about it. They were just kind of intermediate. Do you know if that was the question based on what's currently available? So if there wasn't something available that they knew of on our species shifting, would they answer, I don't know, I don't care, I don't really know about it? Or was it a future, like what type of information do you want to have more of? So that was, is there a way to find out what people want more of versus how do they feel just about what they're currently getting?
Yeah, it would definitely, I'm sure that those questions asked differently would provide very different information. But it was a survey designed to get like current information of how they're accessing, what types of information they're accessing at the present moment.
Hi, thank you. Great job. If you had an abundant amount of time and resources, what other groups would you like to try and reach? And groups, I mean kind of avenues of distributing the survey.
Yeah, so unlimited time and resources, that'd be tricky. Well, I would probably cut the survey, into a million different ways. There's so many ways to like analyze it from. But in terms of like outreach, I think that I think that university scientists would be a good place to share this information, as well as I think people who have more interaction with the fisheries groups, like sea grant extension agents, or like people, it's different sea grant, state sea grants, but yeah.
Could you go back to the trusted sources heat map?
Yes.
So keeping in mind the age differences between the fishers group, which if I recall 30% were in the experienced category, and the non-fisheries group, which was in the a little bit younger, but still, wise. Would there, and actually back to the more detailed heat map on the sources, I'm just wondering if other questions could have been asked knowing the differences between those two groups now. I'm in that, I don't know, XZ generation where I straddle kind of both of them, but I've been out on a lot of boats, and all the skippers, they read National Fisherman like religiously, but they also Google, for having a hub grub delivery, I guess. I don't know. So is there another type of, you get my question?
Yes. Yeah, so that question is, the sources is a little bit tricky, right? Because someone can click on a link that's on social media that takes them to a NOAA website.
Okay.
And so it's kind of like, I think that this survey would be benefited from having like a dual part question on that, where it's like where you access the information, and like where the home of the information is, I guess.
Sure. Because that's really the point, is who is the initial source of the information,
right?
Not necessarily how they're accessing it. Got it. Okay, thanks.
Thanks for the fascinating presentation. So if I understand what you've done here, you've kind of predefined 3 different groups and looked for the variation responses among them. Another way you could look at these data would be to analyze the individual responses and use a clustering algorithm to try to understand what groupings are really occurring in the data. I'm wondering if you or the team have thought about that or looked at that at all.
Did not look at that at all. But that would be really interesting to find out, like you said, like first finding out where the clustering is happening. I will say that I'm surprised that the numbering for the respondents in each group worked out very well. Like I didn't expect it to be like roughly 200 in each group. So that was a good, I guess, place to start for this kind of analysis. But yeah, that would be interesting.
We do have a few more questions online. Apparently we had a little bit of an audio issue on this slide. If you would kind of recap very briefly what you were presenting here.
Okay. So the kind of information that's useful, well, essentially the key takeaway was that the most useful information for all the groups across the board was changing ocean temperatures, changing fish distribution, and changes in habitat distribution. If they missed the primer on heat maps, that's unfortunate. But I think that just, you know, the key takeaways are available. So I'm hoping that that will clear things up.
Yes, I think that probably helped. Okay, and we did have one more question about the initial questions you presented to the group. The analysis presented references to climate, but the questions on the first few slides seem to refer more to environmental. Was it clear that we were essentially equating climate and environmental? So we want to just clear that up.
Yeah, so it was chosen to use the word environmental, if I'm not mistaken, over climate, just because climate change is just a heated word. It's polarizing. So I think that just to approach the survey in kind of like a more neutral way, environmental change was used, but they are assumed to be the same for our analyses.
There's one more question. The questioner is saying that the cluster analysis question kind of answered or kind of goes with his question. What is the age a more important factor than group, or when is age more important factor than group?
Actually, I'm not sure on the answer for that one. I mean, this analysis could absolutely be done through the lens of age. I think that would be really cool. But you are kind of getting a mix of everyone affiliation wise. You could do both. That would be wild, but yeah.
Okay.
The question, like thinking about that, right? So the ages were, I don't remember that slide exactly, but I remember them being quite different for the different groups. So it might be, I don't know, you don't have like an even distribution or similar distribution between these groups too.
We don't have information on mean because they selected age ranges. I'm sure there's some way statistically you could find out the median age. I'm not sure of that method. Yeah.
We should probably acknowledge the MAFAC initial, as you did, the initial analysis. I don't know if we can make that available to folks. That analysis did a basic percent response analysis. And so just give you a flavor of some of the difference. If you look at the percent of respondees that said that environmental information is very important or highly important to them, you know, that kind of 5 and 4, it was almost 90% of them, 85 to 90% of respondents said that no, they were, how concerned are you about the effects of environmental change on fisheries? It was 85 to 90% of the respondents said they were very concerned or highly concerned. So the initial results also have a different perspective on the magnitude of the response, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, and those results are on the MAFAC website as one of their reports under their climate resilience, a suite of projects they did in 2016, 2017. So it is available on, and the MAFAC website is part of the NOAA Fisheries website.
Do we have any more questions in the room? Check online. It doesn't look like we have anything else online, so thank you so much, Zuzanna.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.